Hello, Raimy. How you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, Benny. How are you?
Doing really, really well today. Thank you. A good run this morning, so I feel like accomplished in that way. A better day today than yesterday, so that's already a good start. I will start us off with my good of the week. I'm going to do two things here today quickly. Number one, last night my wife and I had the opportunity to go to what you would call parent night at my daughter's seminary here in Israel, and she's been there about 8, 9 months already. We know the place because our older daughter went there as well. And to just be around the leadership, the founder, other parents, students, to hear what's going on there, to see how much she's enjoying it, to see how she's enjoying it differently than our older daughter was very gratifying and very meaningful from on a personal level that she really enjoys learning. She enjoys studying. She's really leaning into herself on a deep personal level and figuring out who she is and who she wants to be is just incredibly meaningful for me to see because you just want them. You always want your kids to succeed. You want them to succeed at a very high level, and you want them to be just overall just happy with their lives and what they're doing on their own, on their own path with their own choices, with the things that they're choosing to do with their own life. So that was really um, very powerful as an experience. And I wasn't exactly sure, even though again, we'd been there for my older child in that space, but everyone's different that way. So it was really, really great to have that experience. In the course of it, they went around the room and parents had a chance to speak about their daughters and what they're watching and seeing. So I chose not to speak this time around. Last time I spoke for us, and my wife spoke instead and in Hebrew, no less, which was super impressive. And as always, she's hilarious, and she was hilarious and just spot on about it. But it was really, really funny just to see all the kids laughing, all the other parents laughing about her presentation off the cuff. And so that was item number one of my good of the week. Item number two, my good of the week is a completely different thing. So this week I'm going to talk just for a minute about a tool that I think is super helpful in fundraising because a lot of the work that you and I do with the constituencies that we work with are very heavy WhatsApp oriented groups. So WhatsApp, in terms of your ability to manipulate how it works and your ability to get to a lot of people, is very hard to do. So there's this great tool that was developed called, I think it's pronounced Johnny, Joni. I'll link to it in the show notes after, for the ability to bulk message large amounts of people in their WhatsApp. So it feels and reads very authentic and very real. And because people read like 100% of their WhatsApp messages that are personal in that way, you get to people who in an email might not read it ever and take a phone call from you. And so you can reach a lot of people very quickly. And in the space that we were using it last week for a crowdfunding peer-to-peer campaign, it was phenomenally successful in reaching people who we had emailed, someone had tried to call, but the WhatsApp message to them with the link to the donation page, we saw their names come up. And so I just want to recommend that as a potential tool. It's only available on WhatsApp web, not for the downloadable app on your laptop or for your phone, but super valuable, super meaningful, and really, really good.
And one more time, is a mail merge for WhatsApp so you can personalize it to a
Yeah.
bunch of people?
Yeah. Basically, you're able to send it to massive lists of people. You have to be careful because you don't want to get suspended or knocked off of WhatsApp if you're sending too many messages. But if you're doing it, you set it up and it just goes in groups, whatever it is. So it's basically bulk messaging, but personalized bulk messaging to even people who are not in your contacts. You just have their contact information for whatever reason. They're donors to you in the past, you're just not in your phone. You can just upload that Google sheet, that Excel spreadsheet, or if they're in your phone and they're part of a group, you can just use the group and it goes to them just in that vibe, in that feel of WhatsApp communication. Unbelievable.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah,
That's a great tool. I
those are
love
my
it.
two.
I love it. Mine is a little bit more directly fundraising focused. I know your second one definitely had a fundraising tint to it, but mine is squarely in the fundraising field. Is my go to the week is a fundraiser named Michael Mitchell. He is the vice president of advancement for an organization called Feed the Children. He posts a lot on LinkedIn. I somehow started following him a while ago, and he's my go to the week because I'm dealing with a pretty acute problem with a client I'm working with right now, where I've written messaging. This is for a private school in the States. I've written messaging for them. They didn't like what I wrote. They rewrote it, revised it. I didn't like what they wrote, and we've sort of been butting heads on the direction. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what the spot of tension was. It was just one
Yeah.
of those things where we weren't jiving, and it was hard to articulate why. And then in one of Michael Mitchell's recent posts, I think it's actually about a month old, but I came across it earlier this week. It really, for me, it clicked, where what he said is that too many organizations focus on the organizational needs and not on donor impact. And I was really I was trying to focus on what the impact of a donor's gift was going to be, and the organization wants to focus on the bucket that they need filled from this campaign, whether it's scholarships or infrastructure needs. But I was sort of pushing them to talk about the students, and they were talking about, but that's not what the campaign is about. The campaign is about scholarships. Okay, but no, it's not about scholarships. It's about scholarships so that students will get this education. And he just gave me a lot of the right language to think about it with, and it made my most recent response to the school. I think I used the right language to try and help orient them where they should go, and they responded positively. So shout out, thank you to Michael Mitchell for helping me just put all of those thoughts together in my head, and helping me steer a rocky relationship back in the right direction.
We're gonna have to tag him when we post this online because he has no idea that he helped you.
He has no idea. He has no idea.
Awesome. Okay, that is good of the week. I will see you inside the next episode.
Sounds good.
Okay, we're back for, I don't know what number episode, but it's great to be back for episode, I think it's 17, but it could be it's 16, it could be it's 18. I don't know. The Bini and Raimy podcast. Good to have everyone here. We have a guest this week, which is super exciting. I'll let Raimy introduce that guest in just a moment. But first, because I usually forget to do this, take the opportunity here at the outset to subscribe, like, and share our podcast. Dive in at Raimy and Bini pod at Gmail with comments, questions, guest ideas, topic ideas, and whatever else suits you. And away we go. Raimy, the floor is yours.
All right. Today, I am excited to welcome Rabbi Dr. Barry Kislowicz to the show. Barry is an expert in leadership coaching and strategic consulting, with a focus on empowering nonprofit leaders and organizations to achieve lasting growth and impact. Barry, you have a decade of experience serving as a principal and head of school. He has worked with hundreds of organizations and schools across the States, Canada, South America, Europe. He's coached school heads, principals, CEOs, CFOs, helping them all to enhance their operational efficiency and strengthen their leadership teams. Just as a continue the bio for one moment here, Barry has a PhD from Columbia University, rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University, and has been recognized as a Wexner Fellow and Covenant Foundation Pomegranate Prize awardee. Before I turn the mic over to you, Barry, and ask you a couple questions, I will just tell our listeners, I'll plug this for you, that you can find Barry on his LinkedIn page, of course, his website, Kislowicz Consulting, and we'll put that link in the show notes because it's not the easiest last name to spell. Barry has a Substack called Leadership Lenses, as well as a brand new podcast of the same name, Leadership Lenses. Lastly, certainly not least, Barry is married to my sister. There is a little bit of nepotism going on here. But with all of that said, Barry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I'm really glad to be here before your sister Callie did.
Yeah, that's good. Kat, my sister does, she wants to be a podcast guest. Not necessarily our podcast, just in general. She wants to be a podcast guest. So to all of our many listeners out there, if you yourselves have a podcast and would like to interview my sister, she will almost undoubtedly say yes, no matter what your podcast topic is about. But Barry, you definitely beat her to the punch. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I got to ask right off the top, I got to ask this before you go anywhere. In naming your website, Kislowicz Consulting, was part of it to weed out some of the possible potential clients and having to spell the last name to get that website up there?
So my primary concern in going into this was having too much business. So I figured if I just filtered it somehow, actually, the original name was BK Consulting, which is like a lot simpler to spell.
Yeah.
When we started designing the site, the guy doing SEO said, there's 15,000 BK consulting sites, and I'm pretty sure there's no Kislowicz consulting site. So we went with Kislowicz Consulting. I do think Google's smart enough to get at least the top 5 or 6 misspellings. So hopefully you can find us there.
You probably maybe want to buy like those URLs also for the misspelled versions of Kislowicz Consulting and
Yes.
just redirect them to your page just to get it started. But I love it. I love it. All right. I'm good. I'm good now. I'm good. Go for it.
Okay,
There we go.
you got that out of your system, then. Okay. In general, our family, we can talk about names. In Barry's case, it's his last name. In my case, it's our first name. So we
Me
we
too.
could talk about, we could do a whole episode on names. Barry, I went through your bio, and we sort of got the highlights, but I'm curious to hear in your own words how you got into the business of coaching nonprofit leaders with all of your background and all of the things that you've done. What led you to this point?
So that's a great question. For me, it was really an outgrowth of what I did naturally. So I always wanted to be in education. I like at age 2, apparently, there's a story that may be apocryphal, but my parents like to tell it. We were driving up on a long drive. This was pre DVDs, pre anything else to entertain the kids. So parents actually, talk to the kids a little bit. My parents said, Barry, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a rabbi. And they were expecting like fireman, Superman, like so. And so they're like, so why do you want to be a rabbi? And I said, well, because nobody interrupts the rabbi when he talks. And then I became a middle school teacher. So like that didn't work out exactly, but education was in my blood for a long, long time. I loved informal education camp, youth group, school. And when I moved to Israel, I sort of broadened my lens as to what education meant and found that for me, education meant facilitating people's growth. Right? John Dewey, a philosopher of education, has a famous definition that education simply means growth. Coaching, in my experience, has been one of the most powerful ways to see that growth, to support that growth, and to really be there for the combination of supporting and pushing someone to hopefully get them somewhere where they couldn't be on their own.
So interesting. I want to stick on that for a second. First of all, just a parenthetical note, Raimy. This is now the second guest who knew super early on exactly what it is that they wanted to do. And both of those things are odd and bizarre at the same time. We had one guest, and he's a great friend of all of ours, who wanted to be a nonprofit executive from the time he was 15, which was just the strangest thing. And now you, at the age of 2, wanted to be a rabbi, which is great for when the biography comes out about you and they can share that story. But, a little bit funny that that's sort of how you went and where you went, right? Not like center fielder or, president of the United States, which I think a lot of, kids might say, nope, rabbi. So just that was my parenthetical. I want to sit on that definition for you for a sec with you on sort of broadening that lens. It's not exactly where I thought we would start and focus, but it's an interesting thing. All 3 of us at some point ultimately moved ourselves and our families from the United States to Israel. I find a lot of people when they're when they're looking at career and how they viewed career a certain way there, view it slightly differently, and in many cases view it with an expanded lens on what it is that they do. So I actually started in the rabbinate and education and expanded out also beyond it into coaching and consulting and nonprofit work, because I realized that the impact, that what I was looking for was impact, and not specifically a specific location of where that would be, just impact. And once I understood that, for me, it allowed for a lot more opportunities to come my way, and I felt like my impact actually increased. So how did that happen for you, that you saw that shift? Because from a career standpoint, as a head of school back in the United States, that's a pretty good place to land and a pretty good place to be in terms of career trajectory and success.
Right. So, I think the shift actually happened earlier for me, because one of the interesting things about schools is that you get trained to be a teacher. You teach for a little while. I taught for, kind of embarrassingly, I taught for 1 year before I became a principal. I don't know what they thought when they were hiring me, but when you become a principal, you're doing things that you were never trained to do when you were a teacher. And then when you become a head of school, more than half your time is finance, fundraising, board, public relations, marketing. So you're doing all this stuff that you were never trained for. And that for me was a shift. I think that was probably like my biggest trepidation in moving from the principal role to the head of school role. But what I found was that the growth in people and growth in organizations rings very similar to me. As long as, for me, it has to be a mission-driven organization, but enabling a school, a nonprofit, anything else that's really got a mission to figure out how to get where they're going despite the pitfalls, identify pitfalls, kind of see beyond where they are right now. All of that connected, all of that is really similar for me. And so then when I shifted to Israel, I was very fortunate to land in a place called Matach, Merkaz LeTechnologia Chinuchit, the Center for Digital Education, which is the largest curriculum publisher in the company here, and be tasked with building out a program to help about 400 schools around Europe, England, which was part of Europe at the time, South America, and really that task included building really an entrepreneurial organization that ultimately worked with schools and communities to create change. And that solidified for me that this is where I want to be. I can help you be better at your job, which is what I always said about myself as a supervisor. I would like sit my staff down on the first day and say, my job here is to help you do your jobs better, right? There's 20 of you, there's one of me. If I can help you do your jobs better, I'm doing 20 times better than if I just focus on my own stuff.
Yeah. It's to me, it's a very interesting transition. You talked about this being a teacher for a year and then moving into sort of like a management role. And you see this also like in the corporate world also, where someone will be such a good salesman that they'll become a manager. And not necessarily the skills that make someone a good salesperson doesn't make them a good manager of other salespeople. So I do want to hear more about that transition, and then taking that transition even further to say that you were, I think by pretty much any metric that we would put together here, you were a successful head of school. And then to take that and say, okay, I can do this and I can conceptualize it in a way where I can also sort of teach it or coach it to other people. And I'm curious to hear you talk about like the transition from I guess going from a teacher to a manager to a head of school role, and then from a head of school to a coach coaching other heads of schools.
Okay, so let me try and lay this out. And I find in all of my coaching, I actually figure things out as I'm talking. So like I learn more about myself when I'm asked questions or when I'm asking questions. So let's see what I learned here. When I moved from a teacher to a manager, it was primarily because I couldn't stand things that weren't working right. Like things that were inefficient, things that were stupid. I used to call it the school boomerang because you go to one person, you'd ask for something, they send you to the other office. You go to the other office, they send you back to the first office. And all you were looking for was like a pack of chalk for your class when we still had blackboards. And you'd miss the entire class period because you were running around the school looking for your little box of chalk. And so when I had the opportunity to manage, it was like, oh, good. I don't have to worry about somebody else fixing the things. I'm going to fix the things. And it was really about what I would say is best term efficiency. Like, let's get stuff moving right. It wasn't until about 6-7 years into that management side of my career where I started thinking about moving from efficiency to effectiveness. And the difference, right? This is 7 Habits, classic term, efficiency versus effectiveness. To me, the difference was, am I working on tasks or am I working with people? And just the prominence of relationships and the centrality of relationships in creating long-standing change and in spreading beyond myself. So it wasn't like Barry's going to fix everything anymore. It was, let me try and build a network and a community among the people here so that they can really implement and affect change themselves in a way that works for them.
Okay.
Right. And so from there, the shift to coaching was pretty quick because what I did as a head of school, I had 5 principals reporting to me. Meeting with them was my favorite time of the week, not just because it wasn't meeting with complaining parents or angry board members or frustrated donors. I had none of those. But meeting with them was my favorite part of the week because it was coaching. It was sitting down and saying, like, you're running the high school. I'm not running the high school. But because I'm not running the high school, I can hopefully help broaden your thought and enrich your thought and push things forward. Really, it's the same thing that I'm doing now in many ways, except I'm not within the institution, which gives me a little bit more freedom to push. And also over time, I would say the distinction has been my ability to go deeper on a psychological level. And that has to do with experience, the number of people that I've worked with, and I think also with my own individual maturation process and understanding myself and psychological phenomena better.
Did I hear you say you can push more now from the outside as opposed to when you were essentially people's bosses?
I was going to ask the
Yes.
same question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So imagine for a second your boss comes into your office at 9 a.m. is like, hey, Raimy, I'd like to meet with you at 5 today. Right. So you have one task for the next 8 hours, and that's to worry about what the heck your boss is going to say to you at 5 p.m. and assume you're going to get fired and wonder what you're getting fired for and if you're going to get severance and how you'll find a new job and what box you'll live on when you're in a street corner. Right. So as a boss, I always wanted to be sensitive to that. If I'm your boss and I'm pushing you, there's an element of threat in that. There's an element of danger in that. If I'm your coach and I'm pushing you, you can fire me in 3 minutes. And so I can come in with a caveat of you can disregard everything that I'm saying, which means you can emotionally be open to everything I'm saying, right? You don't go to your brainstem and go into fight or flight. You're like, I'm here with you. I'm saying things. I have no power over you. Every coaching relationship I have is completely confidential. Even in schools where I'm coaching multiple people in different parts of the hierarchy, no one learns anything about anyone, which means I can like really be with you in that emotional space and say, I'm going to push you hard now because there's no threat.
I'm curious in relation to that, as you step back in, at the time you're leading the school, did you see that as coaching, or over time it became clear that you were coaching, and in hindsight you realized that's what you were doing the whole?
So I have to give a lot of credit to someone who coached me. It was really by chance that I ran into a woman named Marcy Ballo who was doing some work for our school at the time. As I transitioned to head of school, it was a really challenging transition. I came in at a point where I was told, hey, welcome, head of school. We have to make payroll in 2 weeks, and we're only short about $300,000 for that. So, like, can you take care of that? So, like, really an intense time. I reached out to Marcy just to say like, hey, what is this coaching thing? And we did one session and then we continued working together for the next 6 years. I'm still in touch with her. I spoke to her last week actually. And that for me modeled a lot of what coaching was. And so I knew I wasn't really coaching when I was working with, the principals, but it was on the edge of coaching. And it was that kind of collaborative, supportive leadership, which when you are someone's boss, I think is the closest you can get to an actual coaching relationship.
How would you describe your coaching style now?
That's an excellent question. So first of all, by the way, I also coach baseball, just like in addition to
Thank you for
heads of school principals, CEOs, CFOs, and Little League. I have never won Coach of the Year, but that puts me in good company in our family. Maybe Raby can explain that in another episode. But I would say that my style is really, I was a student-centered teacher as a teacher, right? I try to be a principal-centered head of school, and I try to be a client-centered coach. So it starts with you, the client. It starts with setting up goals of where you want to grow, what you need. And then we balance throughout the sessions, dealing with the stuff that happened. You might need to vent. You might need to brainstorm like, this is a crazy board meeting coming up. What do I do? But we weave into that leadership skills, seeing more deeply into yourself and understanding like what's driving you and what are the patterns you fall into. And then eventually what I call seeing the matrix, like seeing what is actually going on beneath all these things that are happening in your organization, that when you're in the midst of it, you really, you're just caught up in it. You can't see it. So adaptive leadership talks about going up to the balcony. It's a really hard thing to do on your own. And so a key part, like when I get to the highest levels of coaching, it really is about going up to that balcony, seeing more deeply what's happening both in the organization and in yourself.
And do you then have like a set of, I assume you do, but set of goals that you're trying to get to, a metric that they're looking to hit in terms of because you could do that ad infinitum and never end with the client. So like if you're working, let's take a specific example. You're working with a head of school, because I assume you do a lot of school related work, right? So you're working with a head of school, a new client comes in. Take me through not just what you just described, but like what are we driving at here?
Right. So we will typically do like 2 to 3 kind of orientation, get to know you sessions to be able to have that goal conversation. And the goals will be a combination of who you want to be as a leader, how you want to lead, and what you want to accomplish. It might be misleading to talk about them as metrics, but there are definitely indicators. They're generally not numerical, but we identify if I am the kind of leader that I want to be, what kind of behaviors will I be engaging in? How often will I be likely to engage in these behaviors? What kind of mistakes might I make less of? And what kind of mistakes might I make more of because I'm taking more risks? And what am I going to likely see in the organization around me? So what we do is we set up goals, paint a vision of success of what that's going to look like. And then it is a winding road because the best way to move towards those goals is to do it in the context of your day-to-day work. And then it's my job every 3 months or so to pause and say, hey, where are we related to where we're going? I should say that there's fundamentally two types of coaching. There's a short-term version of coaching where like there's a specific skill, specific issue. You bring a coach in for 3 months, you build on that. By the end of 3 months, hopefully you've solved it and you moved on. That's not what I do. When I'm coaching someone and they can cancel at any time, but I'm not interested in going to a relationship where we're not working together for at least 6 months because it takes that long to make any real progress. Just like the research shows with therapy, it takes a full year of therapy before you can expect to make any progress.
That's a hefty investment. I love it. It's great from the business side. It's really just saying, like, you're holding on to clients for an extended period of time. That's good for business. In relation to that, just out of in the space of this, and as some of the things that you're talking about, you're working with a client. Are you sending them to books, to websites, to specific individuals to read? So like I would normally, in theory, ask this maybe later on in the conversation, but you were sort of in this space here now. So make a couple of recommendations here around that, I think, which would be really helpful to people who are listening or
Yeah.
watching.
So I'm a teacher. I give homework. So I will give books to read. I'll also give homework assignments. Let me talk about that for a second first. In the context of goals, I will typically give assignments for my clients from week to week. And most of those assignments are about logging. It's about how many times did I do this? How many times did I feel this way? How many times did I say the following things? Because when you log things, you're suddenly aware of them on a totally different level. And then we sit down and we analyze that the next session. In terms of books, I have a few all-time favorites. I mentioned Adaptive Leadership. I love Leadership Without Easy Answers, which is one of the first books on adaptive leadership. Leadership on the Line, which is the classic book. Both of those are by Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky from Harvard Business School. Amazing in terms of long-term change. For clients who are struggling with time management, I love recommending 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. It is a counterintuitive approach to time management, which I think really, really works. And I do think that in many ways, you can't lead with anything but who you are, right? Brene Brown has a saying where she says, you can't give what you don't have. So I do like recommending some Brene Brown books. I find that a lot of my clients are a little bit reluctant. Like it sounds a little bit too pop, psychology-y for them. So I wait till a little bit later in to see, take the temperature a little bit. But I do love recommending a book called Feeling Better by David Burns, which is one of the seminal books in cognitive behavioral therapy, which really opens a lens. I mean, it's a 500-page book. You have to be up for it, but it lends a window into understanding how the way you may see things is totally different than what things are in reality. And as a leader, we fall into that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm curious, there are certain problems that people have in life where they can easily identify the problem to themselves and understand what solutions are available to them. To me, what you're describing seems, this is all projecting from my lens, but I think like it would take a tremendous amount of self-awareness to know that you're in a position where you need a coach like you to come in and help. You might know that you're frustrated. You might not know that things are not going the way you want. What symptoms are people exhibiting when they turn to you and say, I need help? And what are you responding to them to be able to say, I can help you through that?
So there's really a range. There are the people who are saying, I'm getting yelled at by my board chair. I'm struggling to solve this issue with my teachers, principals. I need some help. I would say that's the minority. The majority of people are growth oriented professionals who reach out and say, hey, I always had a supervisor who helped me grow. I'm out here on my own now. Or I'm about to move from being a principal to head of school, and there's literally 50% of my job that I have never done or been trained for. Right. So I had a head call me last week and say, or a incoming head call me and say, I know nothing about finance. I'm an amazing educator. I know nothing about finance, and I'm about to be running a $25 million budget. And so I have, let's say, a curriculum on finance for new heads of school, as I knock over my mic there just to keep things interesting. Finance for new heads of school, where I can go through those pieces. And so it's really, I think it's an awareness that you need someone to talk to. You need some help on a practical level. And also that as soon as you're in that top seat, you have no colleagues. You have board members, parents, students, employees. You do not have colleagues. And it's really hard to survive without colleagues.
Yeah, at that point, that network disappears, right? You're like on an island in that community, and suddenly there's nobody to talk to unless there's I won't say a competing school, but unless there's another school nearby, you don't even you don't have anybody. I remember in my rabbi days, there was a senior rabbi in the neighborhood who convened a group every once in a while of younger colleagues who all felt on an island and they didn't feel like they had anybody to talk to, that they had anybody who could help. This is before WhatsApp groups, just anything. It was just like, it was the early days of this kind of a thing. And we just got together at his house, off book. Nobody knew about it. And we had a chance to just unload, unwind, share a little bit, feel like we were part of something, because otherwise you felt very much like there's nobody out there. And if I talk to anybody, they're going to know, right? They're going to know I don't know anything, and they're going to tell somebody, I can't believe we hired this guy. He doesn't know anything. And then you're really on an island at that point. And then you keep that. I always feel like it just got smaller and smaller and smaller. And you're reaching for that line, and there's nobody, there's no.
Yeah. So 100%. I would even add on to that when you're in an organizational leadership role that's community oriented, rabbi, head of school, principal, or like a big nonprofit in town, you're always walking out of your house wearing a certain leadership persona, right? You're not walking out as Bini. I'm not walking out as Barry. I was walking out as Rabbi Kislowicz. And it's really easy to lose yourself in that. You don't have the ability to just be you. When we think about, key psychological processes, the process of your own growth, your individuation, your development can be really damaged by that. And it's hard to see it at the beginning, but I've had a number of heads come to me and say, like, I feel like I'm losing myself. I don't know who I am anymore because like I'm that guy making a speech, wearing a suit. Like I need somewhere where I can just be open and remember who I am.
Totally feel that. I just because I lived it, even though I was a rabbi in a big town, and you would feel like in a big town, you would have more of that space. It still felt like you lived in the fishbowl all the time because it was a small synagogue. But I definitely feel it. And working with a lot of other people in that space at the time afterward, I heard that a lot from them. It was just a constant, just it was almost like just a chorus from a lot of people in that space, in that field, that they just feel like they're losing their humanity, their being, their individuality, their person, who they are. They're fitting into the suit rather being the person, and they're wearing the armor. Just on that, they're wearing the armor, which is such a Brene Brown line.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone is not reading her work, they are missing out, because you really in this space is so helpful and so attuned to all the things that you're talking about here. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to an example you gave before, because I find it fascinating. And I think the specific example you gave was fascinating. So you had someone who was an incoming head of school who doesn't know anything about finance, great educator, no finance. Let's say, for the purposes of this example, you have a great conversation with this person and you agree on a 6, 9, 12 month engagement. I know that considering your background and your experience, you have a wealth of experience dealing with a multi-million dollar organization's budget like that. However, I don't think I'm saying anything out of bounds here. You're not a financial expert. You're not a CPA, anything like that. But so you have this lived experience. I guess my question to you is, over the next 6 to 12 months that you're going to be working with this person, how much do you expect your conversations to revolve around the world of finance and this person balancing the budget as opposed to leadership?
So, just to be clear, in my job as head of school, my treasurer, who's a partner at a big four accounting firm, did give me an honorary CPA.
Okay, then I
So
take it back.
I do
take it
write
back.
that next to my name. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Which was his way of giving me more work, I think. So
And more letters to your already confusing
there we
name.
go. Yeah, absolutely. Just stick a CPA in the middle of Kislowicz somewhere. You'll get to the website. It's fine. So it depends what the person's looking for, right? So this person who called me actually has a leadership coach, is working with someone on the broader picture. I'm going to go through with that person. And the truth is, we might even have a group doing this summer, a syllabus going from like the basics through GAAP accounting principles, through your balance sheet, through your run rate, through your financial controls, like A to Z of what you need to know as a head of school. Because the truth is, you need to know everything, right? When you're coming in as a head, I've seen so many schools and organizations that are like losing money, theft, fraud, like things that are just crazy because the head of school can't read a balance sheet or audited financials. And that's your responsibility. As soon as you're sitting in that chair, you are the guardian of the community's money. You also you can't have real legitimacy in front of your board if you can't understand the numbers. You can't talk the numbers. Ultimately, budget reflects mission, right? What you're putting the money into is what you value. How you treat the money, how you treat tuition, membership, fees, donations. You can't do any of that without noting the money. So in this case, where I have a guy who has a coach, we're only going to do money. That will be maybe like 15 meetings or so to go through the whole curriculum we have set up. I've had other cases where it's broader, where the person's like, okay, I don't have another coach, or I have a coach that's been doing instructional training with me or instructional supervision training, and I need governance and fundraising and finance. So that's all together a combination of technical and leadership. And that's probably like 1 or 2 years to work through all of that stuff.
Yeah. I want to also, it leads into a really important piece that Raimy and I were back and forth about in terms of preparing for this conversation. You mentioned it a couple of times, but it also fits into this thing is the multiple constituencies that you're dealing with. You know, in an organization, when you're a head of an organization, you're dealing with multiple constituencies and multiple audiences. In the school setting, you're I mean, as you mentioned, you're balancing all kinds of different things. Coming in as a head, you're suddenly also dealing with, new audiences too that you're responding to and responsible for. So can you talk about being the person in that CEO-ish head of school seat and managing and maybe manipulating, but dealing with all the different constituencies that you're dealing with, even maybe first just laying out what all of them are, because we may have missed a couple in sort of how we thought about it. So yeah, take us through it.
So I'll say, just as an intro, I mentioned the book Leadership on the Line. The subtitle of that book is Leading While Staying Alive. And that is the challenge of every new head of school, every new rabbi, every new organizational head. You've got to make it through that first couple of years without getting killed. And in order to do that, you do have to map your stakeholders. It's one of the first things I do with new heads of school and understand how they interplay. As a head of school, you have board members, parents, community members, administrators, teachers. I think you kind of touched on all those. You also have students. And this is the one that a lot of new heads miss. Your early childhood students, not stakeholders. Elementary school, probably not. By the time you hit middle school and high school, parental impression and community impression of the job you're doing will be defined by how much the high schoolers complain when they get home and what they complain about. What did you learn today? Nothing. Right? Teachers didn't show up. They don't care. They're teenagers. Kind of the way they lean naturally. one of the best pieces of advice I got as a new head was first get the high schoolers on board. If you can do that, then you can pave the way to everything else. High schoolers are actually more important than the board in your first couple months.
Okay, so in that one, just go. It's super interesting because I have a kid at home who's a high schooler,
I'm sorry.
and it's the only one. Everyone else is they're already beyond that at this point. But the youngest, he has a lot of opinions about his principal and head of school that mostly not great. And I mean I take it with a grain of salt, but so I'm curious about two things there. One, how do you do that in terms of, or how did you do that, or how do you work with a coach in terms of doing that for that constituency, the key constituency? And two, how do you know, right? Like, do you have moles in the houses to find out what are the kids talking about at home so that you can hear anecdotally, and parenthetically, I will say this. When I was the rabbi, again, using this as an example, I had two guys who were members of the synagogue who were my Secret Service. They were members who I trusted implicitly. They were friends I asked them to just, I don't know what I don't know, and I can't know everything, but I also want to know what's going on that I need to be aware of. So we would meet, same thing. I back then is super sneaky and strategic about it. We would meet off out of the community and talk through all the things that they were hearing both about me and all the things that I needed to know about the work that I was doing or not doing to be better at the job. So now that I haven't outed who they are, I never will. But I'm curious for you in that space, working with somebody in this, how do you do that?
Right. So I think it goes back to relationships. And it goes back actually to what you said about Brene Brown and armor. The danger of putting on armor is that your stakeholders treat you like just this non-human professional, right? You're out there with the armor, you're the rabbi, you're the head of school. They can say whatever they want about you, to you, around you, because like you probably don't have feelings, right? You're the rabbi. Rabbis don't have feelings, or principals, heads of school, CEOs don't have feelings, or we're paying you so you'll feel whatever we want you to feel. The antidote to that is relationships, right? And there's a level of vulnerability, and I find this really counterintuitive. It's true about staff, it's true about community, it's true about high school kids. The more you want to protect yourself, you want to armor up, but the more vulnerable and open you are, the more you show that you trust them and you're letting them in, the more they get on board and the more trust and respect and relationship they have with you. So like, I often wished I heard less about what the high schoolers were saying at home. It wasn't a problem of like, do I need to hear more? But I heard it through those relationships. They're not simple relationships. I'm not talking about like the two great guys that I went out, to Starbucks in a different neighborhood with to schmooze. I'm talking about the guy who's my president and a parent and a donor, right? And whose kid just got suspended. That relationship still has to be a real relationship. And it's super, super hard. Most heads will retreat from that. You have to go into it. And there's a basic principle that the more open and vulnerable you are, the more people see you as human and the more they value you. And the more people are on the inside, the more they like what you're doing. So everybody hates what they're on the outside of, and everybody loves what they're on the inside of. So your challenge is to get all of them inside. So like with high school students, just give one quick example, right? If I'm planning the Hanukkah party for the high school, right? I can plan it. I can have my student programming person plan it. I can have my teachers plan it. None of that is as good as the high school students planning it, right? That's a different level. If I have an exhibition of student learning that they put together that parents show up for, that's a different level than sending home grades or parent-teacher conferences. And the same thing applies if you're running a JCC or a federation or Jewish Family Services. Your stakeholders have to be on the inside and feel that they're on the inside, not crossing the bound into operations, nothing unprofessional, but just that feeling and connection, which really brings them on board with you.
Again, I like the examples that you're bringing up here. So I want to pick on one for a second. So you have your board member, and think in your example, it might have even been a board president who has a kid in the school, is donating certainly as a board president, but even just as a board member, this person is a leader within the school itself. And presumably, I'm guessing, this person has had some degree of success in his or her professional life and is therefore, not therefore, but is also presumably a leader in his or her workplace. So, how do you see those leadership qualities differing when you're a leader in the business world and then you come to a nonprofit board and have to be a leader there and then have to interact with the professional nonprofit leader like that? For that person to wear different hats must be challenging as well.
It really is. And I'll say this at the risk of offending, everybody in the corporate world, because I only work in nonprofit. It's much easier to get away with being a crappy leader in the corporate world. Because if you're a crappy leader and you make money for people, they don't care. Right? You can be a total jerk. I've heard of many jerks who make a lot of money. They make a lot of money for their. I mean, I even had a board member once tell me, "See that other guy here? Total jerk. I hate him. I invest with him. He yells at me. He doesn't want to hear what I have to say, but then he returns it with like 20% growth. So I don't care." In the nonprofit world, you can't rely on that. You're not making your name based on money. You're making your name based on impact, based on what you're giving to the community. And that's often really hard for professionals who are getting into the lay hat to make that switch. What I found is doctors, lawyers, others who are not professionally managers often have the hardest time with it. Somebody who's the CEO of a large company is dealing with management and leadership on a different level than somebody who is a partner in a law firm, partner in an accounting firm. And it depends on the personality. Some of those people are amazing leaders in the nonprofit sphere, but they have to be open to it. And so that actually led to one of the things I do as a rule. Whenever there's a new head or a new board chair in a school I'm working with, we do a 2 to 3 hour orientation meeting. And that meeting is the head, the professional head, and the lay head together talking about how do we communicate? What's our value? What legacy do we want to leave? How am I going to tell you when something's really wrong? How do I expect to reach you in an emergency? A to Z, making everything explicit. And I found that completely changes the trajectory afterwards.
Are the lay leaders who are successful professionals, are they generally receptive to this approach before they come into it, or do they?
I found them to be shockingly receptive. Like, shockingly. I assumed I was going to get tons of pushback. And if you deal with a lay leader when they're in the boardroom, like under scrutiny and embarrassed in front of a crowd, or when they're angry because something went wrong, you're not going to get anywhere. But when somebody's about to become a school board president, almost every single one has said to me, like, yeah, I really don't know how I'm supposed to do this. I'd like to do a good job. I don't want to be fighting with people for 2 years, and I don't want to be a failure around the community. So let's sit down. Let's figure out how we can do this.
It's so refreshing to hear. I got to be honest, because, again, from the standpoint of the coaching work that I do with the leader of an organization, I don't usually deal with the board member other than in having them try to fundraise or fundraise more or whatever that is. And my experience as a leader in a number of nonprofits is that I've always used the term shockingly. At the beginning, shockingly surprised at how poor some of them were as board members when they were so phenomenally successful in their professional lives. And I used to tell people, like, throw it out, like whatever they are in their professional lives, it does not for some reason transfer or matter or resonate or connect or move into the boardroom when they're running your organization. In a synagogue environment, a religious environment like that, they could be sitting next to you in the pews and be your best friend. And then you're in your boardroom and they're crushing you on a day in, day out basis. And you're like, aren't we friends? Like, maybe, and so it's nice to hear that this kind of what you'd call a board training, or at least a board leader training, is actually receptive and received in a way that is meant to then ultimately be productive. Because I would say, and I'll add to this, I'm always like happy, but also sad when I hear people talk about that one board member who's amazing, right? Because it means that 9 of the board members are terrible. And as a trend, it's like most of the people who are on boards are not just not good at it, they're like a negative in terms of what they're doing in that organization. And so, like, it's nice to hear, but it's like that
Really?
one person, like 30 years ago, is the one board member you remember. And like that's not a good trend. And so like, it's nice to hear that when you're dealing with these new people coming in, that's received well.
Right. So I think it goes back to a couple things, and I don't want to give the impression that all the board members I deal with are wonderful.
No, that's my job, not your job. My job here is to say that about the
Absolutely.
board members.
Absolutely. They're all one. But like, you take people who've been trained in one area and are really intelligent, successful people that spent 20 years learning how to do A, and you say, okay, well, that means you probably know how to do something entirely different, which is high pressure, low reward, right? Requires often totally different skills. And we're like, hey, go for it. So yeah, they do a terrible job. And what do we do to train them? We're like, you know what? We'll do a board retreat. Come to a lake house for 4 hours in September. Okay, bye. Go, good luck. I won't do board retreats, actually. The only work I will do with boards is work that is sustained, because we know from the research, if it's not ongoing work along the lines of coaching, if it's once every 2 weeks, once a month, but it's not once a year, you can create change in boards person by person as long as you're working consistently. And again, I think most of these negative board members, I think if you actually interview them, and I've done a number of board surveys that have shown this, they'll say, I don't know what I'm doing. So like, you put me in this stressful situation, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to lash out. I'm going to be frustrated. But if you equip me with tools and show me how to make good progress, then maybe I'll be a little bit easier to deal with and a better partner for you.
So good. Oh my gosh. Okay. On that, just in the same space, because Raimy, I don't know if like you're now some like different level impressed by your brother-in-law or like what's going on, but I'm watching your face and I'm just trying to figure like, what's Raimy thinking here? What questions does he want to ask? Is he shocked by some of the answers? Is he surprised? Is he not? Does it confirm what he's always known about this individual? Jump in any time here on those things. I say something good.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Barry's been in my life for about 2 decades now, and I'm just learning at this moment that he's really smart. This has never dawned on me before. I did not realize.
There's your bumper sticker. I love it. So part of what I'm hearing from you here is, and I think it sounds actually fairly similar, is the communication level that you need to be, I would say, proactive on and intentional about with the students in your school. Let's say it's a school environment or the beneficiaries, wherever that is, and your board members in terms of how open you are, not totally open, but how open you are, how communicative you are, how clear you are in it, maybe how consistent you are in your messaging really goes massively a long way to getting you to be as effective as possible. Like you talked about this board meeting with the board head and the new head and the head of school, and it sounds almost like marriage counseling on some level, and maybe it is, I don't know, more premarital because they're not actually
exactly
together yet. Like I sort of down the right line here, thinking about how intentional, how smart, how careful, how out front that person has to be in these spaces, whether it's board members or again, the other constituent member groups that they're dealing with.
Right. So I think there's a really interesting balance. I want to go back to a word you used a while ago called manipulation. Right. So you can get into this Machiavellian manipulation. I'm going to like plan 5 steps ahead. You're sitting on a board, but I'm playing chess. That is actually something you have to do, but you have to do it without losing the humanity, right? You need to be able to see 10 steps ahead of where your board is right now. You need to know how things are going to develop. You need to know that if I don't have this premarital counseling, as you put it, I think it's really like exactly on track, then you're going to have problems in 6 or 12 or 18 months. So you need that foresight. You need to be able to anticipate that. That's part of actually what I love being able to give to my clients, because I've done this with, I think, 250, 300 organizations at this point. So I often will say to them like, okay, you're going to go into this meeting, A, B, C, D is going to happen. And they'll text me and they'll be like, how did you know that? I'm like, well, first of all, this is what I do. And second of all, this is what happens in this particular kind of meeting pretty much everywhere. So you have to know that. You have to plan for it. You have to bring in the new board member on a committee today who you know is going to be your great president in 5 years. But you have to, at the same time, have deep human relationships and not lose your respect and your authentic connection to those people. And that is really difficult. Maybe the best analogy is parenting, right? you have a really deep relationship with your kids. You also should be seeing further ahead than your 5-year-old. Raimy, we actually have to talk about parenting later, but we'll do that off camera.
Such a loaded comment. I different podcast altogether.
So no, but you've got to do that. You've got to know where your kid's going, where they're growing, what's important for them. And at the same time, if you ever lose respect for them and stop treating them as really their own independent human being, not just as an appendage or extension of you, then you've lost them.
Wow. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Is this a good time to plug my book on parenting?
Do it. I didn't include it in your bio.
Yeah, no, well, I'd love people to buy it. I think Parenting in Perspective, published about 10 years ago. I got 22 cents for every copy you buy. I'm on my way to being wealthy.
We have an affiliate link that comes to the podcast. We'll
Absolutely. You'll
one
get
quarter
2.2 cents of
Thank
every
you.
22 cents that I get.
Can I lean in on just one point here? And we're almost done here in terms of time because we're almost out of time here and sort of how this works. As you're working with different leaders across so many fields in the nonprofit space, what are those like qualities that are that the essentials, let's say, for the leader to have to be as successful as they want to or can be? Some things that they're good at naturally are not helpful in the work that they're doing. So what are the things that incoming leaders into the different spaces should be working on, should be thinking about, should be focusing on? Because those are the essentials that they need to be the most successful.
Yeah. So when I was just entering my graduate school and Smicha training, I was working with a mentor who said, he was working with a group of us in the Wexner Fellowship and said, every one of you and every leader and synagogue rabbi needs to get a therapist today. So I kind of both laughed and said, that's really expensive. But what he was getting at wasn't just like, oh, you have to vent or anything along those lines. It was developing your own self-awareness is the number one key to being successful. And I find that leaders who don't understand that they have a blind spot, or leaders who will tell me in coaching, no, I don't have a blind spot, I know that, like, you're in trouble. Right? You have blind spots. That's exactly your blind spot, right? So I think that self-awareness combined with emotional intelligence is an absolute necessity. Beyond that, I think you can work around your strengths and weaknesses. I have leaders who are great at finances, terrible at education, great at fundraising, terrible at finance. As long as you know what you're good and not good at, as long as you're self-aware, and then you can surround yourself with people who are not like you. Right? That was one of the best pieces of advice I got from my first board president was, Barry, look around. If in 6 months all the people around the table are just like you, you failed. So understand who you are, surround yourself with a good team. And if you maintain that self-awareness, which comes with a great deal of humility, or is only possible with a great deal of humility, I think that's the key to being successful.
Yeah. Not what they call one of the hard skills. That's one of the soft skills, right?
Right.
So,
even though it's one of the hardest ones to master.
Yeah. No, it's super important. And you can see leaders who are clearly not self-aware, and you probably you steer clear of them, but you notice them, you see them, you feel like, wow, that person is not paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I won't coach anyone who has been forced into coaching, right? Boards or supervisors will say, hey, I want you to coach him. It's not going to work. When they're ready to seek coaching, then we're great. But you have to be open to it. You have to be seeking growth on some level, even like just the littlest bit, and then we can make a lot of progress.
Amazing. Really amazing. Okay. I think we're out of time here, so we're going to hold it here. Barry, thank you for really an enlightening and illuminating hour with you, and really loved it. It's not the first time we've sat and talked and yapped about some of these things, and we didn't geek out as much about some of the things that I think we've talked about in other places and other times over the years, but it's great to have you here. It was an honor to have you on, and thank you for sharing so much wisdom. We will, all the things you mentioned at the beginning, all the books and all the websites and the Substack and the podcast, we will add into the show notes. Raimy, final thought.
No, I appreciate this. I know we talk a lot, but we don't get a chance to get into the weeds like this. So I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Really my pleasure. And Bini, if you can also put in the show notes, if anybody wants embarrassing stories about Raimy, just email me. We have picture evidence as well. So just go for it.
There's so many that he shares in the podcast.
Think about the ones he doesn't share.
That's true. I hadn't thought about that considering last week's Good of the Week. I hadn't thought about the one stories that he hasn't shared. Okay, I won't go there. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Barry, so much. Thanks, everyone, for listening
Thank
and
you.
watching with us.
Thank you.
We'll
This
see you
was
next
great.
time on the Bini and Raimy